Welcome to part 11 of the Second World War. Now we're going to talk about the war in the Pacific, the turning of the tide. Now, like I said, the Japanese were pretty much controlling the Pacific Ocean for 6 months, almost to the day. But at the same time, the Americans were building up an advantage of their own. First, it had to do with code breaking. Now, the U.S. had already decoded the Japanese diplomatic code, codenamed Purple. Matter of fact, is because of that we knew a lot of what was going on along diplomatic channels, even leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, right? But the Japanese military code, the JN-25 code, was a lot more difficult. By May of 1942, we had partially cracked the code, enough so to know that there was an attack that was imminent on the south coast of Papua New Guinea. And the only obvious choice here was Port Moresby, right? If the Japanese, who had already gained control of the majority of that island, got Port Moresby, that would serve as a launching point for them to possibly even invade Australia, right? So the United States, even though its Navy was badly rocked, is going to send what resources it has available to try and blunt this attack. Well, what they have is they have 3 aircraft carriers, right? Now, only 2 are going to make it to the battle on time. The USS Enterprise is going to attempt to get there, but it's going to be late, right? The other 2, though, the Lexington and the Yorktown, will go down to the Solomon Island chain there and in the Coral Sea, which is this area south of Port Moresby where the Kido Butai, the Japanese attack force, is going to be, right? Now, the Battle of the Coral Sea on paper is kind of a draw, right? The Americans will find the light carrier Shoho and they'll sink it. They'll find, I think it was another oil tanker. Meanwhile, though, the Japanese will inflict some pretty devastating damage on the American carrier fleet. They will attack the Lexington, hit it with 2 torpedoes and a bomb, sinking it. They will hit the Yorktown with a single bomb on the deck. And they'll report it sunk. They'll be wrong. The Yorktown will begin limping back towards Pearl Harbor. Fortunately, they don't, because Pearl Harbor still has the dry docks. They didn't have to limp all the way to the coast of California, right? But the reason why this is a draw is that the Japanese also took extensive damage to its large carrier, the Shokaku, and lost most of its aircraft for its other carrier, the Zukaku. And the Zukaku and the Shokaku both will not be available for the next battle, the pivotal moment of the war, the Battle of Midway. Now, while the Battle of the Coral Sea there on May 8th, 1942 will effectively end Japanese advancement from islands to islands, the Battle of Midway on June 4th will effectively begin to reverse the tide. It's the true turning point of the war. This is a plan that was conceived by Yamamoto Isoroku. His plan was to try and get these aircraft carriers. You know, you got to get these American aircraft carriers if this whole idea of creating an unbreakable perimeter is going to work. So we got to lure them out and destroy them. The plan he comes up with is immense. It consists of 16 different groups of ships. It has 2 light carriers that are going to conduct a diversion attack on Dutch Harbor in Alaska. It's going to include an invading force that's going to conquer the Alaskan Aleutian Chain Islands of Attu and Kiska. It's going to have a main force of 4 large aircraft carriers under the command of Admiral Nagumo Chichue, who was the same admiral in charge of the Pearl Harbor attack, right? As far as the carrier ships. The invasion fleet is going to have landing craft to capture Midway Island itself, the main target of the main attack. Its main body fleet is also going to have the most powerful battleships ever built, including the Yamato, which had one of the largest guns ever put on a naval ship. But again, American intelligence is going to win out here. They have cracked the Japanese JN-25 code. They've got about 90% of it cracked. The only thing that they can't figure out, they know this big invasion's coming. They know there's the diversion, which they're going to totally ignore because they know it's a diversion. The only thing they don't know is the target. They think it's Midway Island, but they're not sure. So they contact Midway Island and they tell them, we want you to send a message out asking for parts for your desalination plant. Say your desalination plant is broken and you need these parts. They say, but it's not. I said, just do it. So when they do that, the very next day, the Japanese send a coded message saying target's desalination plant is inoperative. Now they know. Yeah, their coded target island is Midway. So they quickly began putting together their attack force to counter the Japanese fleet. They've got 2 aircraft carriers at the ready, the Hornet and the Enterprise. They're in Hawaii. The Yorktown is limping back still from Coral Sea. It'll arrive on May 22nd. The engineers and repair crews will look at the Yorktown and say, wow, this is a badly damaged ship. It's going to take us 6 months to fix it. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, will say, you have 72 hours to get this ship back out of here. You have 3 days, right? We must have this ship back in 3 days. The repairmen will work night and day, and they'll do it. Under the command of Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, the Yorktown will leave and begin heading out to join the Hornet and the Enterprise around Midway. There'll still be repair crews hanging off the side of the ship, welding temporary plates over holes. That's how quickly and how efficiently these guys ran, and just, how much effort was put into this. Now, on June 3rd, 1942, scouts from Midway Island will sight the Japanese transport ships. So they know they're almost there, right? The carriers, they'll miss the carriers. They were shrouded in a rain squall at the time. On June 4th, Admiral Nagumo, believing that the American fleet was still pretty far away, is going to launch a raid on Midway Island, trying to break down their defenses. He's sending out scout ships looking for the American fleet, and unfortunately, the one scout ship that's launching aircraft, a cruiser called the Tone, was late getting its scout plane launched from the cruiser. That search pattern happened to be the direction that the American carriers were actually in. Now, these two fleets eventually find each other, right? Through the use of aircraft. And initially, it looks like this is going to be another disaster for the Americans, right? They launch attacks from the Yorktown and the Hornet. These attacks, the Enterprise and the Hornet, these attacks are thwarted. They do not do any damage to the 4 Japanese carriers. Finally, the Yorktown is spotted by a Japanese attack squadron. It is bombed, leaving the deck blazing. They'll fix and the Japanese will report the Yorktown sunk again for the second time. They will quickly fix the decks and actually get the ship operational again, and fix it so well. Remember, there's all those repair crews on the Yorktown, that when the Japanese found it for a third time and strike it for a third time, they'll report it sunk a third time, and at least this time they'll finally be right, right? But finally, planes from the Enterprise and the Yorktown dive bombers will find the Japanese fleet, and by the end of the day, there on June 4th, all 4 Japanese carriers are burning. They're destroyed. The Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, and the Hiru are all destroyed in this attack. And this is why it's a turning point. From this point forward, the Japanese really can't expand anymore, right? The teeth of their Kido Butai, their attack squadron, has been destroyed. From this point forward, the United States will be on the offensive, and they're going to launch a 2-prong attack in order to roll the Japanese back and eventually take Japan itself. A northern attack, which is going to be an island-hopping campaign conducted by the U.S. Navy, and a southern attack that runs up through the Solomons and up towards recapturing the Philippines, run by Douglas MacArthur and the United States Army. All right. That island-hopping campaign is going to begin actually with an effort in the Solomon Island chains at a place called Guadalcanal. The first American landings will take place there on August 7th, 1942, when the 1st Marine Division will land there. Now, ultimately, they will take this island and hand it over to the Army as part of their southern campaign. The northern island-hopping campaign will begin at a place called Tarawa. Tarawa is significant in that it gave the United States a good feel on what it was going to take to conquer Japan, right? The fighting on Tarawa in 1943 was tremendous. They're going to land Marines there on November 20th, 1943. Right on the island, there was 4,836 Japanese troops under Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki. Right. When the battle was over 2 days later on November 27th, only 17 Japanese soldiers had surrendered. The rest of them had been killed. They refused to give up. They would booby trap their dead or dead Americans. They would launch bonsai attacks, the fanaticism of following the Bushido Code, right? And this is going to play a heavy role as the United States continues this island hopping campaign and eventually has to make a decision on what they need to do to end the war itself. So we're going to see a continuation of these heavy casualties throughout as the American forces move closer and closer to Japan. For example, on June 15, 1944, U.S. 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions will land at Saipan and Tinian. The intent was to take over these islands because they could be used as bomber bases as part of the strategic bombing campaign against Japan itself. There were 23,000 Japanese troops on this island, and most of them were killed in the process of taking it. Included amongst the dead was Lieutenant General Sayato Yoshitsugu and also Vice Admiral Nagumo Chichui, the same commander of the carriers there at Midway and Pearl Harbor. Right? Large numbers of civilians will die too. The first time American troops will see this, they'll see mass suicides. They were the Japanese civilians, which there were plenty living on Saipan and Tinian, were told to surrender was to be less than a dog, and they would said that the American troops would rape and kill you and everything else. So you would literally see women take their children to a cliff edge on the coast, throw them off the cliff, and then jump off themselves. Right? Iwo Jima would be another target. It would be invaded in 1945. The purpose of Iwo Jima was to create an emergency landing field for bombers returning from raids on Japan from Saipan and Tinian. Right? It was the landing will take place on February 19th, and again there'll be a tremendous amount of loss of Japanese and American lives. In the first day attacking this little 4.5 by 2.5 mile island, you're going to have 2,420 casualties. By the time it was the island is taken, 28,696 Americans have gone down as casualties, with 6,821 of them having been killed. 1/4 of all the Congressional Medal of Honors won by U.S. Marines in World War II were won at the Battle for Iwo Jima. All right. Finally, we get to Okinawa, one of the first of what we would consider Japanese home islands. And here we really get a taste of just what it's going to cost to take the main islands themselves. Right? April 1st, 1945, multiple divisions land on Okinawa, including the U.S. Army 7th and 96th Divisions and the Marine 1st and 6th Divisions. They're all under the command of Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr. Right? On the island, there's a garrison of 110,000 Japanese soldiers led by Lieutenant General Ushijima Mitsuru. There's another 20,000 volunteers, militia as well. Right? And there's about 300,000 civilians living on the island. The carnage will be devastating. E.B. Sledge wrote in his book of experience on his experience on this. The book's called With the Old Breed. He said, "Everywhere lay Japanese corpses killed in the heavy fighting. Infantry equipment lay of every type, U.S. and Japanese, was scattered about. Helmets, rifles, bars, packs, cartridge belts, canteens, shoes, ammo boxes, shell cases, machine gun ammo belts. They were all strewn about, all of us up all the way over Half Moon." Okay, the island won't be declared secured until June 21st. By that time, you had 12,000 Americans dead or missing. 70,000 Japanese soldiers or militia were killed. Between 100 and 150,000 Okinawa men, women, and children had died during the fighting, caught up in the fighting. Right? And they got to witness another mass suicide. Right? Another group of civilians afterwards that had committed suicide. Both commanding officers, both Buckner and Ushijima, were killed in the fighting. Right? Well, Buckner was killed and Ushijima committed seppuku, right? Ritualistic suicide. Right? During the battle, the Japanese are going to launch 10 separate kamikaze attacks against the American fleet, killing 5,000 sailors and sinking 30 ships. These are all things that are going to weigh heavy when it comes time to determine what do we do to end this war and take Japan itself.